Hello and welcome to the paper 2 video on the Edexcel period and British depth study. In our case, we look at the British America unit, which is 1713 to 1783, and then the depth study is Anglo-Saxon and Normans. The paper is 1 hour 45 minutes. This is the longest one out of the three. There are two sections, and the first section focuses on British America. The second section focuses on Anglo-Saxons and Normans. There are 6 questions still, and the timings are on here. Notice that there are 2 big 16-mark questions, but the rest are all 5, 10 and 15 minute answers. So for section A, you've got 10 minutes down here, which is explain 2 consequences. Treat both of them separately. So explain 2 consequences of a particular event. So one consequence and then another consequence. We'll look at that in a second. Second one is write a narrative, not as daunting as we think. That's again 10 minutes. And the last one, explain 2 of the following, 30 minutes. So you want to spend most of your time on that. With this paper, you could start with the 16-mark ones to get them out of the way and then focus on the smaller ones later on. It makes very little difference. Just make sure you stick to time. For the Anglo-Saxons, we've got a nice 5-minute one there for 4 marks. A 15-minute one here, which is explain why, which you've seen before. And how far do you agree for 30 minutes, 16 marks. So section A, question 1, explain 2 consequences. For this example, you've got the French and Indian War for the American colonists. So we're thinking, what are the American colonists doing in this time period? What was the consequences of the war for them? Let's look at the example. So it will look a little bit like this in the paper. You'll have consequence 1, consequence 2. Notice the buzzwords that are mentioned in bold. So the effect of this as a result, and this meant that. So one consequence for the colonists after war was the rise in tension that was caused between the colonists and the British regular soldiers. So there's my point there, that actually there was a rise in tension. The effect of this was that during the war, the colonists were not treated equally, their pay was smaller, and they were often not quartered together. So I've given 2 pieces of evidence there. One is that their pay was smaller, and they were often not quartered together. That means they didn't stay in the same place. As a result, beautiful buzzword, key buzzword, as a result, this tension would eventually lead to the colonists unifying together against the British to complain about being treated as second-class citizens. So that's explaining the consequence. Now this kind of like is the final stage, which is saying why this is a consequence. In this case, it's saying this meant that Britain could face a more organised problem in the future. So we've got our point, our bits of evidence, our explanation, and a why. But it's those phrases. The effect of this consequence was this. As a result of that, it led to that. This meant overall the following. Notice again on the second one. A second consequence is that the war gave the colonists more training in how to fight a war. They're really not rocket science points. You know, they've just fought the French-Indian War, and as a consequence, they are now better at fighting. So the effect of this was that during the war, you don't need to know loads and loads of facts, but if you do know it, then throw it in. 25,000, I've said here, colonists joined militias. Militias are armed men. It's not an organised army. There's small pockets of men that are armed from towns and villages and so on. And they gained necessary military experience to fight against an organised army like the French. So that is my evidence, like we've just done. As a result, look at that buzzword again, this showed the average colonist how to fight in a battle. George Washington served in the conflict, and although he did not achieve any significant victories, he was able to learn the art of war and could put this to practice in the wars of independence in the 1770s. That's quite a nice bit of explanation there. And then it finishes it off again with the why. Why? This meant that Britain would find it difficult to defend against a more organised enemy. So hopefully you've seen the structure, you've seen an example, but that's what we're talking about when it comes to consequence. Question 2, writing a narrative. For the narrative, it's asking you to tell the story, but obviously we don't just want you to narrate events, we want you to kind of show how one event led to another, led to another. In this case, they give you these 2 points, so these 2 points are given. Okay, you've got to come up with a third. So it says, write a narrative account analysing key events of 1758 to 60 that led to the French surrender. Okay, so we want to be talking about, you've got to roughly have this in your head, this time period, 1768 to 60. what was going on. So this is the French-Indian War. This is looking at the French abandoning Fort Duquesne and the capture of Montreal, which was led by James Wolfe, hence the picture, which is just down here. That's Wolfe climbing up the heights of Abraham. The third point, I've just put here the role of William Pitt. Perhaps you could talk about how he helped reorganise the army and help lead them to victory. Anyway, let's have a look at an example. So this is it. This is actually the 8-mark example, the whole thing. Notice again, I've put buzzwords in. So that's the start point just there. Start in 1858. This led to, as a result, and finally. So that is kind of showing that this is the end of the narrative. There's the start. And it's showing how one thing led to another. In this case, in 1758, the French were in a strong position. They had the Native American allies, don't forget the N there, and control of important forts in both the Ohio country and Canada. So I've set the scene. This is why, this is why we've got the issue in the narrative. However, their fortunes began to change because the American colonists received help from the British Prime Minister William Pitt. Notice how that's the extra bit of information I've added in. This led to the recapture of Fort Louisbourg from the French, leading to the Native Americans seeing them as weak and joining the British. So it's saying how this one event here, there's event 1, has led to event 2. So the reorganisation of the British has led to the Native Americans joining the British. William Pitt sent more British troops and supplies to the conflict, and as a result, it led to the capture of Quebec in 1759 by James Wolfe. Notice how I've mentioned Pitt, I've mentioned Fort Louisbourg, I've mentioned James Wolfe. I could perhaps mention Fort Duquesne in there as well, which is what it says in the stimulus points. But I've ended it with finally the shift of the Native Americans helping the British allowed General Johnson to capture several more French forts like Niagara, and eventually with the loss of so many forts and settlements, the French surrendered. Start. This led to, as a result, finally. So it gives you an idea of how to structure this one. Final one for British America is explain 2 of the following. So the last question, they will give you 3 statements and they'll just ask you to explain 2 of them. So it's asking you to explain the importance of the Piracy Act for the suppression of piracy, the importance of King George's War in relations between the colonists and the Americans and the natives, and the third one is the importance of the Declaration of Independence for slavery. So look at particularly these bits here when it says for the suppression of piracy, relations, or for slavery. So it's not just saying what's the importance of piracy, it's what's the importance of piracy for this. So you need to pick 2. Here's the example. All I've done is I've chosen 1. You would have to choose 1 more. So you'd have to do this twice for the marks. Notice what I've done here. So I've got reason 1 for importance, reason 2, and then a mini conclusion. So the Piracy Act was important straight away because it helped reduce the attacks from pirates, which was costing the colonists thousands of pounds worth in unpaid taxes and goods lost. So there's my first point. It meant that, use phrases like this to say what this means. It meant that pirates would be executed when found. This was important as it was a step towards a more harsh sentence following the King George proclamation earlier in the year. As well as encouraging pirates to stop their actions, it meant that ordinary people could shop a pirate in for a reward. For example, the governor of Nassau used this as an opportunity to retake the island and arrest pirates. So I've used examples or pieces of evidence in there, like the governor of Nassau, or Nassau, the King George proclamation, and so on. But it's really talking about why it was important for the suppression of piracy. Second reason, I made it super clear, look, second reason why it was important was because the Royal Naval ships could now capture, try and execute pirates more easily. This led to an increase in the number executed. For example, there's another example. In 1718, 110 pirates were hanged. Again, if you don't know these facts, just roughly go along the lines of there was an increase in the number of pirates being hanged or caught. Overall, the act was important in bringing about harsher punishments, which allowed the naval and American governors to arrest and execute pirates. Reason 1, reason 2, conclusion. Do that for a second one on that list and you're done with British America. Okay, so Top tips for helping you out with section A of paper 2. When you're looking at explain the consequences, use this as a tick list. One consequence was, so state it. The effect of it was, as a result, and this meant that. When you're writing a narrative, talk about the start, it began when, this led to, this resulted in, and finally. And then explain 2 of the following. Remember, it says here repeat for another point, then move to the second question. You need to have 2 of these reasons. So a reason for its importance, why it was important, what did it eventually lead to, and how it made a difference. Notice that each of them has got a conclusion or some sort of summary point at the end. And that's pretty much it. If I'm honest, I just have a go at looking through these examples and maybe practicing some of your own. Hope that's helped. Good luck, and the next video we'll be looking at section B.